Politics here on News 12. I'm Kurt Semder. And as we wrap up April, it has been quite a month for our state legislators up in Albany. You've seen the headlines here on News 12, whether it be legalizing recreational marijuana or passing a historic $212 billion state budget, all while an investigation is underway into alleged inappropriate behavior by Governor Andrew Cuomo. Now, joining us this week is the state senator for the 34th district here in New York, representing the Bronx and Westchester, State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. And Senator Biaggi, I want to thank you so much for being here with us this week. A lot to talk about, a lot to get into, so thanks again.
Thank you for having me. There's so much to get to.
There really is. And I really want to dive into that state budget in just a second and everything that is now available for New Yorkers. But first, it has been months now since you and other members of the legislature called for Governor Cuomo's resignation following multiple former staffers accusing him of inappropriate behavior. Attorney General Letitia James conducting an investigation, but the governor said he won't resign. And a new Siena College poll on Monday shows that 51% of New Yorkers say he shouldn't. So as we sit here today, what are your thoughts on where we stand with the governor and those allegations, and do you still think he should resign?
So I still think he should resign. And I think the most important thing for your viewers and for my constituents and really for everybody in New York to understand is that the situation that we are experiencing right now is not normal. Nothing about what is going on is normal. And unfortunately, what we're seeing from the governor and the rest of the executive branch is an attempt to act as if it's business as usual, to shift the narrative and also to really allow for everybody to forget or hope everybody would forget in that shift in narrative. But I think what's really clear to me is that New York will never lead with integrity if the very issues that we claim to champion are abused by the people who are serving in our highest office. And the people serving in our highest office perpetrating that harm, as well as all of their enablers, are not the victims here. It is unclear to me how this many women can speak up about the abuse that they've experienced with the governor and that he is still sitting in our highest level of office. And so I believe at this very moment in time still that we have more than enough information to begin drafting articles of impeachment, and that really what's happening in the assembly is that there's a conscious decision to prolong the governor's time in office, which unfortunately is endangering the safety of the state workers who are still in his office, who have come forward with their experiences, as well as others who have reported the abuse in response to what they've experienced with the governor. And so in addition to this, something that is also very important for everyone to just keep in mind is that it's not just the women who've come forward to speak about the abuse that's happened. It's also the 15,000 lives that we should never forget who were lost to COVID-19 in nursing homes. And I think that the most important thing that we continue to do here is to center the conversation around those lives lost and the families that are suffering from those losses, as well as the survivors who have spoken up, which is an incredibly brave act in the face of an incredibly powerful man and in the most powerful position in our state government. And so again, just to reiterate, I still believe that the governor should resign. It's unclear to me why and how we are still in this very moment in time where there has been no accountability, and he hasn't stepped aside. But regardless of that, there are many investigations underway, and I am very confident that the result of those investigations will shed light on the truth of the matter. So I think it's just a matter of time.
All right, we're going to continue to follow that, of course, as it goes on, as the results of those investigations continue to come in. And I'm sure you will continue to keep your eye on everything going on with the governor's office. But let's get into that state budget, because this was a big deal. The state legislator and the governor, you guys were all able to come to an agreement here. This budget includes a lot of things. We're talking about, fully funding public schools in 3 years, $1 billion in small business relief. And that's not all. You've said that this will provide, quote, much needed relief to our most vulnerable communities. So what do New Yorkers need to know about what this budget means for them?
So I'm glad that you started it that way, because I think in the past two budgets that we've passed, what at least my constituents have heard and what New Yorkers have heard from me is really a disappointment in our budget. And this year is a dramatic shift away from disappointment. It was a historic budget. It includes many progressive wins, that provide meaningful relief for all of our communities in the Bronx. And a lot of the conversations that I was really championing in the budget discussions were about and centered around Bronxites. And so some of the additional things that we've done this year is to provide tax breaks for working and middle class New Yorkers, while also ensuring that the very wealthy pay their fair share, so that the money that we can raise in revenue from that amount of taxes raised will be the vital support for families and for businesses that are still struggling from the COVID-19 pandemic. There are also incredible aspects of the budget, but for Bronxites, I think they will most appreciate something you've alluded to already, which is the foundation aid funding, rent relief, the small business grant relief program, the excluded workers fund. For education, the fact that we were able to provide $1.4 billion in this year's budget, which is the largest increase ever, with a 3-year phase-in, which means that in 3 years' time, $19.8 billion will be spent and given to our public schools, which means that the promise that many of us came to Albany to fulfill on, which is to make sure that we are having full foundation aid, is going to be fulfilled in 3 years, which is incredible. It is a historic win for education and for public education specifically. With regard to rent relief, which we know there are a lot of Bronxites who are renters, the budget includes a historic $2.4 billion in what's called the COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This program will provide up to 12 months of relief for eligible tenants. There is also a program that we've created for small businesses, which is $1 billion total, $800 million for small business grants, $200 million for small business tax credits, in addition to the Excluded Workers Fund, which is the first in the nation of its kind. And this will be a benefit program, a one-time program for all of the individuals who have not received any government aid from the federal or from the state government during this entire pandemic. And so this includes undocumented immigrants that have experienced unemployment during the pandemic and have really been left. And really the thousands of tax-paying workers who have lost employment or income during the pandemic, but again, were ineligible for unemployment insurance or for other federal benefits, such as stimulus payments that many did receive. And so, this is why the final budget includes the $2.1 billion in excluded worker fund. And again, it's a one-time unemployment benefit for these workers. These are the people who are the backbone of our economy. They are the ones who do the backbreaking work and have seen no relief. And so just, in that very short list that I've given you, there's so much more to talk about, but those are the biggest things I think that those who are in the Bronx will mostly benefit from. And I'm very proud that we were able to provide that relief in this very large way.
And you should be proud because, as you said, there is a lot in that budget there, and it took a lot of hard work from both sides to come together and get this budget done. And when you talk about the schools there, we heard Mayor de Blasio talking about on Monday about the fully funded public schools. People hear it, it sounds good, but what does fully funded public schools really mean for the children in your district?
That's such a good question. So when I entered the state Senate in 2019, my district was owed $54 million. Wow. Where did I get this amount from? There was a court case going back about over a decade ago, more than 10 years ago, which was the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. Now I'm getting into the details, so I'm going to zoom out. Essentially, what that court case decided was that all of the public schools in the state of New York were owed money from the state. And so the money that is owed has grown in amount because we as a state have not actually paid the schools what they are owed. And so in District 34, what it means is that tens of millions of dollars will be provided for the schools, not only in this year coming up, but also in the next 3 years, so that by 3 years from now time, what we will see is that every single public school will not only have the money that it needs to survive, but it will have the money that it needs to also plan and thrive. So making sure that there's funding for things like tablets, which we know is a massive need across the entire borough. Making sure that Wi-Fi, again, is accessible to everybody. Making sure that we can actually retrofit schools for safety purposes and also make good on the money that schools have spent, which we know has been costing schools, not just public schools, but all schools, lots of money. So there's a whole host of things here, in addition to something that I've left out that I really do want to mention, which is a $105 million expansion of full day pre-kindergarten, so pre-K, to 210 districts who do not currently receive state-funded pre-K. Now, I know for those in the Bronx who have been very fortunate to be able to have UPK, it's something that is very much normal and it's very much part of your everyday lives. But for so many others across the state, they don't have access to UPK. And so what that often means is that there are a lot of children who do not enter the education system until much later, which of course delays their growth and their ability to learn. But also it's a really large burden on families. And so the ability for us to have put this amount of money to expand the UPK program is incredible. And it's something that's going to have rippling effects across the entire state.
You mentioned about several items there in the budget. We got into it. Is there one particular item that you feel is not getting enough attention that really needs to be focused for people right now?
I think that, gosh, there's so many things that I feel just very grateful for, namely the rent relief program, because as you know, many Bronxites pay 30% of their income, unfortunately, on rent. So this is going to not only help those who are in need, but it's also going to make sure that those who don't have a savings to pay back some of the rent that they owe can actually make good on the rent that's owed and then continue to actually move forward and go back to work and also continue to build up their savings for the future. So I feel like, I could talk about so many other things, but the reality right now is that the things on the top of people's minds are my children going back to school, and are my schools going to actually have the things that they need? Am I able to stay in my home? Are we able to actually make sure that there's funding for that? And are our small businesses going to be able to survive? Because so many have not. And for those who have, the ability for them to have access to funding is going to really just allow for us to get on a path of recovery that I think we would not be able to have if we didn't have relief.
We're going to talk about police reform and much more coming up in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. More News 12's Power and Politics straight ahead. Back to News 12's Power and Politics. I'm Kurt Semder. We want to continue our conversation right now with State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. We've been talking a lot about the budget and everything that's been going on there, but I want to talk with you a little bit about police reform right now, because this is a big issue that we've been seeing across the country. And I mean, we're not even talking about the fact that a lot of people talk about it, but we don't get tangible changes. One change that you have mentioned previously is removing police from traffic stops. It's something we just saw go horribly wrong in the case of the death of Daunte Wright in Minnesota. So do you believe that this change would help to avoid these types of situations going forward?
So I do, and I think that in our real continued effort to end police violence and also just to reimagine what public safety looks like, removing police officers from traffic enforcement was one of the ideas that stood out to me the most. Every year, there are at least 20 million traffic stops in the United States. And this idea of removing law enforcement from police officers, from traffic enforcement has been raised by policing reform and traffic safety scholars and advocates across the country, in addition to New York State Attorney General Letitia James. And so what we know right now is that the largest predictor of police violence is simply contact with the police. I wish that weren't true, but it is. And the most common contact that Americans have with police is actually through traffic stops. And so traffic stops are viewed as an essential tool in the law enforcement arsenal because officers are constitutionally permitted to search a vehicle during a stop if there is probable cause, of course, to believe that evidence of a crime exists in the vehicle, or if it is reasonably necessary for officer safety. But so often what happens is the probable cause appears to be driving while Black. And so Black Americans are stopped nearly 40% more frequently than white Americans, 40% more frequently than white Americans. And so knowing all of these truths, in order to decrease police contact with citizens, really we will be reducing the potential for racist police violence, escalation, and also unnecessary interaction with the criminal justice system, while also maintaining road safety. And so New York can lead the nation by eliminating traffic enforcement from the purview of the police. And I think that, when I think about what's possible here, my team and I are looking at all of the different ways that we could make something like this happen in New York State, potentially in phases, so that we can reduce this unnecessary police violence against New Yorkers while maintaining road safety. And I think with anything like this, a societal shift of this kind will be a massive undertaking. But in order to make the change that all of us want to see, we have to start somewhere. And so what I anticipate is that there's a likelihood of getting something like this done in steps, again, in phases. So for instance, automated enforcement with speed cameras and things of that nature. But it will be a longer term goal here. It's not something that can happen overnight or certainly, in just one legislative session, but it's something that is worth our time because of what is possible if we actually make this happen. And so I really want to continue the conversation with a lot of the public who, I represent, but also across the state that has a vested interest in this issue, as well as stakeholders about what could be the most effective legislation that we put forward. So I'm open to thoughts and ideas, and I, in fact, encourage them, not only from the people that I represent, but from anybody who feels like this is something that calls to them as an issue that they want to be working on.
I feel like that, yeah, the conversation is the most important thing, to make sure that everybody's talking and everybody's getting their views out and everybody's listening too. That is also a very important part of this. To that point now, moving on to another issue, moving on to climate change. This is something you've spoken about very recently. In fact, you recently published an op-ed urging the need to pass the Climate and Community Investment Act. What can you tell us about that, and why is that so crucial?
So the CCIA, the Climate Act that you just referenced, would really charge entities that produce greenhouse gases as well as other co-pollutants $35 per ton of pollution that they generate. And so we can come back to that in a second, because why I am talking about this and why this matters is because you can draw a direct connection between the pollution that has poured into communities in the South Bronx, and as a result, the high asthma rates, and also the devastation that's been wrought by COVID-19. And so it is going to take structural change in our economy and in our systems to move away from polluting sources of energy. But there are also smaller scale strategies that we can pursue to make a really marked difference in air quality. And so it's not just true in New York City, although it is especially true in New York City. But we also know that within the population in New York City, people of color and low-income New Yorkers are more likely to live in areas with high levels of pollution. And so they're breathing in polluted air every single day. And this leads to exactly the kinds of health problems that we saw as the comorbidities that people have died from as a result of having and contracting COVID, because it increases your risk of course, having COVID, and also the impact that it has on your health.
This April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. It's also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. These are two issues that you are very active in. What do you want people to know during for these causes this month, and what more can be done? So
for me, this is an issue, childhood sexual abuse as well as sexual assault are two issues that I work on regularly. I have a package of bills that will not only expand what we've done in 2019 and 2020, but really make sure that we are providing the strongest laws in the country for survivors of assault, misconduct, and harassment. And so in my survivors justice package, one of the things that I really want to see done is to protect riders in for-hire vehicles from sexual assault. And so as it is right now, any fare-paying passenger in an Uber and a Lyft, in a vehicle for hire, there's an ability for the driver and the passenger to have consent. And so when it comes to somebody being assaulted or raped by the driver, what happens is that ability to consent it plays a really significant. What we want to do is remove the ability to consent from those kinds of relationships. In addition to that, making sure that we expand something called Aaron's Law into private schools. In 2019, we passed Aaron's Law. This was a bill that provided for K through 8 education, age-appropriate education about childhood sexual abuse for children, and it is proven and has been effective in almost all of the states that we have pass it in. We are, as a state, the 37th state in the country to do this. And what we have seen is that in real time, while this curriculum is being taught, children actually get up, because they have the tools now and they understand how to report it, and they actually report their abuse during the lesson. It just happened actually last week in Rochester. And for me, the fact that this is something available to public school students means that it should also be expanded to private schools. And so that's something we really are trying to do, in addition to a whole host of other things that I know we probably don't have the time to talk about. But the fact that we're raising awareness about childhood sexual abuse as well as sexual assault are two things that I'm appreciative of.
And we'll have much more here on Power and Politics coming up in just a bit. Senator Biaggi, thank you so much once again. A lot of great stuff with you this week. Keep up the great work, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Thank you very much. And just as a small PS plug here, one thing again that we did in the state budget that I just really would be remiss not to talk about is the amount of money, the $10 million that we allocated to making sure that we create the fund for victims of crime. And this is specifically for those who are victims of gun violence. It is the first in the nation of its kind. And because we have seen gun violence spike across the city, this is something that we know will make an impact. And we hope that other states across the country also follow form with New York on.
Senator Biaggi, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And don't forget, you can catch up on all of our Power in Politics episodes over on our website at news12.com. All you have to do is click on Politics at the top of the screen, and then you can see this show, as well as all of our interviews with the candidates running for mayor and Bronx and Brooklyn Borough President in the upcoming primary this June. Once again, thank you to State Senator Alessandra Biaggi for joining us this week, and thank you for being here with us as well as we wrap up this episode of Power in Politics right here on News 12. I'm Kurt Semder. Enjoy the rest of your day.